On February 26, 1959, a Soviet search party found exactly what they were looking for on the slopes of the northern Ural Mountains. But the scene made no sense. Half buried in the snow, a canvas tent sat with its walls violently slashed open from the inside. Inside, everything remained in place. The group's heavy winter coats, insulated boots, and food rations were all neatly arranged and untouched. Whoever was inside had fled into the night while leaving their only means of survival behind. Survival on this desolate ridge without that gear is mathematically impossible. Temperatures that night had plummeted to nearly -40 degrees Celsius. Leading away from the camp, searchers found 9 sets of footprints marching single file down the dark slope. Some tracks showed thick wool socks, others showed bare feet. These were experienced mountaineers who understood the lethality of the northern Urals. Yet they had deliberately cut through their only shelter to face certain death in the freezing darkness. The tracks led roughly 1.5 kilometers down the slope to the edge of a forest. There, beneath a large Siberian cedar tree, searchers found the first 2 bodies. They were frozen solid, stripped down to their underwear. Months later, after the snow began to melt, the rest of the group was discovered. 4 hikers were buried deep in a ravine, their bodies showing massive internal trauma. They suffered crushed chests and fractured skulls, injuries typically caused by a high-speed car crash, yet their skin bore no external cuts or bruises. The forensic reports detailed disturbing anomalies. Several victims were missing their eyes. One was missing her tongue. Most confusing of all, laboratory tests detected traces of beta radiation on several pieces of their clothing. Soviet investigators closed the case in May of 1959. Their official resolution concluded that the hikers were killed by a, quote, compelling unknown force. The files were then sealed in state archives and hidden from the public. This combination of missing data and a vague official ruling fueled 60 years of wild speculation. Without facts, theories emerged blaming everything from secret KGB weapons tests, local mountain spirits, and Yeti attacks. In 2019, the Russian government finally reopened the investigation. Researchers from the Swiss Research Institutes EPFL and ETH Zurich used modern geomechanical modeling to re-examine the physics of that mountain slope. The hikers made a critical mistake when they set up camp. To shelter from the wind, they cut a wedge directly into the 23-degree slope. While this angle is usually too shallow for a traditional avalanche, the excavation destabilized the specific layers of snow sitting directly above the tent. After the tent was pitched, intense katabatic winds began sweeping down the ridge. Over several hours, these dense downslope gusts transported massive amounts of snow, packing it into a heavy, solid slab right above the weakened trench. Eventually, the weight became too much. The unstable slab fractured and dropped straight down onto the tent. This was a localized impact, a heavy block of hard snow falling directly onto the sleeping hikers like a concrete slab. This delayed mechanical failure explains the autopsies. A heavy, rigid block compressing a hiker's chest against the hard tent floor accounts for the massive internal fractures, while leaving the skin and the surrounding snowpack undisturbed. Science also provides a rational explanation for the hikers found in their underwear. In the lethal stages of hypothermia, failing nerves send a false sensation of extreme heat to the brain. This causes a documented medical phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where victims desperately strip off their clothes even as they freeze to death. Slashing the tent from the inside was a rational response to being buried in total darkness. Trapped under a slab of heavy snow, the hikers had seconds to cut their way out and flee toward the trees to avoid being crushed or suffocated. The missing eyes and tongues are the predictable result of biology and time. Those bodies lay submerged in an active snowmelt creek for nearly 3 months. Scavenging animals and natural decomposition targeted the softest exposed tissues first. The trace radiation traces back to mundane sources. The camping lanterns used by the group contained thorium-laced mantles, and one victim had previously worked at a nuclear facility handling radioactive materials. When analyzed through modern forensic science, these spooky anomalies are simply the predictable consequences of severe blunt trauma, of extreme cold exposure, and natural biological decomposition. Reconstructing the night reveals a timeline of heroic resilience. After the snow slab struck, the uninjured hikers dragged their wounded friends out of the wreckage and guided them through a blizzard to find shelter a mile away. Near the cedar tree, they fought to stay alive. They climbed the tree to snap off branches for fuel, managing to spark a tiny fire with bare, freezing hands. In a final act of desperation, they attempted to build a snow den in the ravine to protect the wounded. That shelter ultimately collapsed, burying the last of the survivors under meters of snow. The evidence on the slopes tells the story of a highly coordinated, heroic fight for survival. Every footprint leading away from the tent represents a structured attempt to save the wounded against overwhelming natural odds. Igor Dyatlov and his friends were not careless amateurs. They were capable mountaineers, joyful students, and friends on the verge of mastering their craft. When senseless tragedies occur, human psychology naturally reaches for conspiracies or supernatural villains to provide a sense of order. The real horror of the Dyatlov Pass is found in the immense, indifferent power of nature. It reveals just how fragile the boundary is between human expertise and total disaster.